to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where your only task is to rest. Tonight, you'll drift into a cozy treehouse evening, tucked high among whispering leaves and gentle starlight. Settle into the shape of your bed, letting it hold you as if it has been waiting for you all day. Allow your shoulders to soften, your jaw to unclench, your hands to become warm and loose. If you can, let your tongue rest easily behind your teeth and smooth the space between your brows. Take a slow breath in through your nose, as though you're sipping in calm air. Hold it for a moment, not tightly, just lightly, and then let it out, long and unhurried, like a candle flame, bending without going out. Again, breathe in, feel the rise of your chest, the gentle widening of your ribs, and breathe out, letting the day fall away, as if it's a heavy cloak sliding from your shoulders to the floor. One more time. In and out. Now imagine that each exhale makes you a little quieter inside. Thoughts may come and go, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need to chase them or solve them. You can let them float past like little paper boats on a slow stream, bobbing along until they slip out of sight. In your mind, a path appears. Not a sharp path, not a demanding one, a soft one, a small trail that feels familiar, even if you've never walked it before. It winds through a calm woodland where the air is cool and the world is kind. Night is approaching, but it isn't dark in a fearful way. It's the gentle kind of night that brings quiet and rest and the promise of warm light waiting ahead. With each breath, you feel more present in this peaceful place and less pulled by anything else. The sounds around you are soothing. Leaves shiver softly in a breeze that seems to know exactly how to touch the world without disturbing it. Somewhere far off, an owl offers a single velvety call, and then the forest returns to its hush. Let your breathing keep its slow rhythm. Let your body be heavy and safe. And when you're ready, the story can begin. The woods were a deep green during the day, but as evening arrived, they turned into a tapestry of shadow and silver. The trees held on to the last traces of sunlight, the way a blanket holds warmth after someone has stood up. Between the trunks, fireflies began to glow, not all at once, but in gentle suggestions, tiny lanterns blinking awake. At the heart of this forest stood an old oak, wide as a cottage and steady as a promise. Its bark was furrowed and strong, and its roots curved above the earth like the backs of sleeping animals. High in its branches, cradled as if the oak were carefully holding a secret, sat a treehouse. It wasn't the sort of treehouse built in a hurry with sharp boards and crooked nails. It looked like it had grown there, little by little over time. The wood was smooth and honey-colored, polished by wind and weather and patient hands. Round windows blinked with lamplight. A small balcony curved around one side, and wind chimes hung there, thin shells and worn bits of sea glass that made the softest music whenever the air moved. A lantern glowed at the end of a rope bridge leading from the treehouse to a neighboring maple. The bridge swayed slightly as if breathing. Everything about the place suggested comfort, the kind that doesn't shout, but hums in a low, steady tone. Inside the treehouse, a person named Elowen moved slowly, not because she was tired in a heavy way, but because the evening itself asked for gentle motions. Her footsteps were quiet on the wooden floor. She had lived here long enough that she knew which boards creaked, and she avoided them without thinking, the way you might avoid stepping on the edge of a rug. Elowen's hair was braided loosely down her back, and a few curls escaped to frame her face. She wore a soft sweater the color of oatmeal, sleeves pulled down to warm her wrists. In her arms was a bundle of kindling gathered earlier and dried on a shelf near the window. The treehouse smelled faintly of cedar, dried herbs, and the lingering sweetness of apples. A small stove sat in one corner, its door open like a yawn, ready to receive the kindling. Elowen knelt and laid the thin sticks carefully, not rushing. She stacked them the way someone stacks thoughts when they want to make sense of the day, calmly, with a quiet order that soothes the mind. She struck a match, and the flame appeared, brief, bright, and then steadier. When she touched it to the kindling, the fire caught with a soft crackle, like the forest, whispering a secret to itself. Elowen closed the stove door and watched through the glass as the flame grew. It painted little moving shapes on her face. Outside the round windows, the sky shifted toward night, a gradual deepening like ink, dissolving into water. On a table near the center of the room sat a kettle, a clay mug, and a small jar of honey. Elowen filled the kettle from a copper basin, the water making a quiet, satisfying sound as it poured. Then she set it on the stove's warming surface and listened to the first faint changes, the tiny ticks of heat traveling into metal, the smallest tremors as water began to prepare itself. In a basket by the door, a cat stirred. The cat's fur was dark and glossy, with a white patch on the chest like a bib. Its name was Bramble, and it carried itself with the dignified patience of a creature who understands that comfort is a serious art. Bramble stretched, front paws extended, claws unsheathed, just enough to catch on the woven basket. The cat yawned slowly, as if tasting the air. Then, with a soft chirp, it hopped down and padded toward Elowen, tail lifted in a gentle curve. Elowen smiled and ran her fingers down Bramble's back. "Good evening," she murmured, though the forest and the treehouse already seemed to have said it in 100 wordless ways. She moved to the window and opened it just a little, letting the evening air enter. The breeze brought the scent of moss and cool earth. somewhere nearby, a stream ran over stones, a constant, quiet song. The treehouse was perched high enough that the sound of the stream arrived softened, as if filtered through leaves and branches. It was the sort of sound that didn't demand attention, but if you listened, you could feel it, smoothing the inside of your chest. Elowen rested her elbows on the windowsill and looked out. The forest canopy stretched in rolling waves. The last light of day clung to the horizon in a thin ribbon of gold, while above it the sky grew dusky violet. The first star appeared, one bright pinprick, then another, and another like someone slowly stitching a pattern into velvet. It was the kind of evening that made everything feel possible, but also made it feel unnecessary to do anything at all. A cozy sort of possibility, the possibility of rest. Elowen had spent the day tending to small tasks, sweeping the treehouse floor, airing out blankets, collecting herbs from the window boxes that hung along the balcony. She'd checked the lanterns and refilled them with oil. She'd gathered a few fallen branches from the forest floor and carried them back in a bundle, taking her time. Now the work was finished. The tree house was warm. The kettle would soon sing. The night was arriving like a friend. She crossed the room and pulled a thick blanket from a trunk. It was woven in soft colors, deep green, cream, and a muted rust like autumn leaves. She draped it over the arm of a chair by the window, the chair positioned perfectly for watching the sky. Bramble jumped up onto the seat and turned in a circle, kneading the cushion. The cat settled into a loaf, eyes half closed, clearly approving of the evening's arrangements. Elowen opened a small cabinet and took out a tin of tea leaves. The label was worn, but she knew what it held: a blend of chamomile, dried apple, and something faintly floral that tasted like warm dreams. She measured a spoonful into a little strainer and set it over the mug. As the kettle warmed, Elowen moved about the treehouse in a slow loop, checking corners as if tucking the room in. She straightened a stack of books on a shelf. She smoothed a pillow. She adjusted the wind chimes so they wouldn't tangle. The treehouse had its own quiet magic, not the flashy sort that sparks and dazzles, but the gentle kind that lives in steady routines and small kindnesses. The oak itself seemed to hum with it, a low vibration of life and time and deep roots. Outside, the rope bridge swayed slightly. A gust of wind ran through the leaves like fingers through hair. The lantern at the bridge's end flickered, then steadied. Elowen heard it then, a soft tap-tap on the wooden wall near the door. Not loud, not urgent, just a polite request to be noticed. She paused, listening. Another tap, and then a faint rustling, as if something brushed against the treehouse's outer beam. Bramble lifted its head, ears pricked forward. Elowen's expression stayed calm. In this forest, sounds like that were rarely dangerous. They were often curious. She walked to the door and opened it. On the small landing outside, perched on the railing, was a tiny creature no larger than Elowen's hand. It looked like a moth, but more delicate, as if made of moonlight and soft paper. Its wings were patterned with pale silver swirls. Its eyes were dark and gentle. Around its neck, it wore something like a thread of ivy, braided into a little collar. The creature blinked slowly, then fluttered once, sending a dusting of faint shimmer into the air. The shimmer drifted down like the tiniest snowflakes and vanished before touching the floor. Aloan breathed out in quiet recognition. "Ah," she whispered, voice warm. "A lantern moth." The lantern moth tilted its head as though it understood the greeting. Then it lifted one small leg. Tied to it was a thin ribbon, and attached to the ribbon was a folded square of paper. Aloan held out her finger, and the lantern moth stepped onto it lightly. The creature's feet felt like the soft brush of a feather. With her other hand, Aloan untied the ribbon and unfolded the note. The paper smelled faintly of pine resin. The note contained only a few words, written in looping ink. "A visitor arrives with the evening. Please keep the hearth bright." Aloan's eyes softened, and she folded the note again carefully. She didn't seem surprised. In the forest, messages sometimes traveled on wings. Sometimes they arrived in the shape of a breeze, turning a page in the right book or a certain acorn falling at your feet. She looked out over the balcony. The woods below were darkening, but the path that led to the oak was faintly visible, lined with small stones that caught starlight. Aloan spoke softly to the lantern moth. "Thank you," she said. The lantern moth fluttered its wings once more and lifted off, drifting into the night like a small floating lamp. It vanished among the leaves, leaving only the memory of its shimmer. Aloan stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the evening's depth. The air was cooler now, and it smelled like distant rain that might arrive later or might not. The forest seemed to exhale. She closed the door gently and latched it, not as a defense, but as a simple ritual of coziness. The kettle began to murmur, and then to sing. Aloan poured hot water into the mug. The tea leaves swirled, releasing their scent. Steam rose in delicate ribbons, carrying warmth up to her face. She added a small spoonful of honey and stirred slowly, watching the honey melt into the amber liquid. Bramble hopped down from the chair and followed Aloan as she carried the mug to the window seat. Aloan sat, pulling the blanket over her lap. The chair accepted her like it had been shaped for this very moment. Outside, the sky was fully night now, scattered with stars. The moon hung low, a curved smile among branches. Aloan sipped her tea. It tasted like chamomile softness and apple sweetness, like the calm part of a memory. She listened. In the distance, a nightbird called, then fell silent. The stream's song continued, steady and patient. The wind chimes gave a faint clink, then settled. Aloan's mind drifted, not in a restless way, but in the way a boat drifts on still water. She thought about the note, a visitor. The forest had its ways of bringing people where they needed to be, especially in the evenings when the world's edges softened. The treehouse, in its quiet warmth, had welcomed strangers before. Not often, but when it did, it was always gentle. It was always someone who needed a safe place for the night, someone who had wandered a little too far in their thoughts or their travels. Elowen didn't hurry. She simply kept the hearth bright, as the note had asked. She added one more small log to the stove, watching the fire take it slowly, savoring it. Time passed in the easy way it does, and there's nothing to fight against it. Then Bramble's ears twitched again. The cat moved to the door and sat, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, as if appointed as a quiet guardian. There was a sound, faint at first, the creak of the rope bridge, a soft footfall, then another. A gentle knock, more a touch than a knock, on the door. Elowen rose, blanket slipping from her lap like a leaf falling from a branch. She crossed the room and opened the door. On the landing stood a traveler. The traveler wore a cloak, the color of night soil, deep and rich, and beneath it a sweater with sleeves frayed at the cuffs. Their hair was slightly damp with evening mist. Their face was calm, but their eyes held the look of someone who had been walking for a long time. Even if the walk had been quiet, they didn't appear frightened. They appeared relieved. "Hello?" the traveler said softly, voice like a small bell muffled by wool. "I hope I'm not intruding." Elowen smiled with a kindness that didn't ask questions right away. "You're not," she replied. "Come in. It's warm." The traveler stepped inside, pausing as if to absorb the cozy atmosphere. The firelight painted their features gently. Bramble rose and approached, sniffing the traveler's boots, then rubbing its cheek against their ankle as though offering immediate approval. The traveler's shoulders dropped a little, tension releasing. They reached down to scratch Bramble behind the ears. Elowen closed the door and gestured toward the chair by the window. "Sit," she said. "You must be chilled." "I didn't realize how cold I was," the traveler admitted, voice quiet. "The forest feels different after dusk, softer but deeper." Elowen nodded, understanding. "It does," she agreed. "It's a good kind of deep if you let it be." She moved to the table, set another mug beside the first, and poured more tea. The traveler watched, eyes following the steam as if it were a spell. Elowen added honey, stirred, and carried the mug over. The traveler accepted it with both hands, fingers wrapping around the warmth. They held it close, breathing in the scent. Their eyelids fluttered, as if the smell alone was a comfort. Elowen sat across from them on a low stool, not too close, giving space the way you give a shy animal space. The fire crackled gently, filling the pauses between words. For a while, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The treehouse itself seemed to speak, in soft language made of warmth and wood and night. The traveler sipped the tea, their breathing slowed. Their gaze drifted toward the round windows, toward the stars. "It's beautiful here," they said finally. Elowen's eyes followed their gaze. "The oak keeps it steady," she said. "It's been here longer than any of us. The treehouse is just a little listening place in its branches." The traveler smiled faintly, as if that phrase landed somewhere deep inside them. A listening place, they repeated, tasting the words. That's exactly what it feels like. Bramble hopped onto the traveler's lap without asking permission, because Bramble didn't believe in unnecessary hesitation. The traveler laughed softly, the sound like a warm exhale. Alowan watched them, seeing how their posture softened further. The traveler's hands moved automatically, stroking the cat's fur in slow, steady motions. It was the kind of movement that calms the mind without effort. The traveler looked around, eyes catching on small details. The wind chimes by the balcony door, the stack of books, the herbs drying on twine near the ceiling. Their gaze paused on a small shelf where a collection of smooth stones rested, each one marked with a tiny painted symbol: moon, leaf, star, wave. Elowen noticed their interest. "Those are for grounding," she said gently. "Each one reminds me of something steady. When the mind gets busy, it helps to have something simple to hold." The traveler nodded slowly. "I think my mind has been busy for a long time," they admitted, voice barely louder than the fire. Elowen didn't press. She simply nodded, letting the admission be enough. Some things, when spoken softly, already begin to heal. Outside, the wind shifted, and the wind chimes offered a brief, sweet song. The sound hung in the air for a moment, then dissolved. Elowen rose and took 2 small bowls from a cabinet. She filled one with a handful of dried berries and nuts, and the other with slices of apple she'd stored earlier. She set them on the table between them. The traveler looked surprised, then grateful. "You're very kind," they said. "Alowan," she replied, offering her name as gently as she offered food. The traveler blinked, then smiled. "I'm Rowan," they said. Rowan. A name that suited the forest, suited the evening. Elowen repeated it softly, as if placing it carefully on a shelf. Rowan ate slowly, savoring each bite. The apple was crisp, the sweetness clean. The berries were chewy and bright. It was simple food, but it felt like a small ceremony. As Rowan ate, their gaze grew heavy-lidded, not from boredom, but from safety. The treehouse had that effect. It softened the edges of wakefulness, inviting rest to approach. Elowen watched the way Rowan's shoulders had stopped hovering near their ears, the way their jaw loosened, the way their eyes, when they blinked, stayed closed a fraction longer each time. The fire's glow deepened, making the room feel like it was floating in warm amber. Elowen stood and moved to a ladder that led up to a loft. The treehouse had a sleeping nook up there, tucked beneath the curve of the roof. She climbed quietly, retrieved a folded quilt and a spare pillow, and brought them down. Rowan watched her with sleepy curiosity. "You can sleep here tonight?" Alowan said, laying the quilt over the chair and fluffing the pillow. "The chair by the window is more comfortable than it looks. Or, if you'd rather, there's the loft. It's cozier up there." Rowan's eyes flicked toward the ladder, then toward the chair, then back to Elowen. "I think the loft," they said, "if that's all right." "It is," Elowen replied, as if it were the easiest thing in the world for someone to be welcomed. Rowan stood carefully, as if their body had forgotten how to move without urgency. Bramble jumped down, stretching, then followed Rowan to the ladder as if escorting them. Elowen held the ladder steady while Rowan climbed, one slow step at a time. When Rowan reached the loft, they sat on the edge of the bed, looking around at the small space. The ceiling was close enough to feel intimate, and a little round window offered a view of the stars. A tiny lantern hung from a hook, casting a soft glow. Rowan's face softened with something like awe. "It feels like a nest," they whispered. Elowen smiled up at them. "It is," she said, "a safe one." Rowan lay down, pulling the quilt over themselves. Bramble leapt up and curled near Rowan's feet, a warm, purring weight. Rowan's hand found the cat's fur and rested there, fingers barely moving. Elowen climbed halfway up the ladder and tucked the quilt around Rowan's shoulders with gentle care, like someone tucking in a child or tucking in a part of the world that needed kindness. Rowan's eyes fluttered closed. "Thank you," Rowan murmured. Elowen's voice was soft as moss. "You're welcome," she replied. "Rest." She climbed down and returned to the chair by the window. She didn't turn on any brighter lights. She let the treehouse remain dim and golden, a pocket of warmth in the night. For a while, Elowen sat and listened to the quiet. Rowan's breathing above became slow and even. Bramble purred steadily, the sound like a small engine of comfort. Outside, the forest continued its nightlife in whispers. A branch shifted. A leaf fell. Far away, water moved over stones. Elowen sipped the last of her tea, feeling warmth settle in her belly. She watched the moon drift higher, its light sliding across the leaves like silk. She thought about how the forest guided people, how it offered shelter in unexpected places, how sometimes, when someone was weary in a way they couldn't name, the world answered with something simple: a warm fire, a cup of tea, a quiet loft beneath a roof of wood and stars. Elowen's eyelids grew heavy too. She let herself sink deeper into the chair. The blanket still held her warmth. The air was just cool enough to make the fire feel especially pleasant. She listened to Rowan's breath above, matching her own breath to it, slow and steady. In the corner of the room, the wind chimes gave one last tiny clink, then fell silent, as if they too were drifting toward sleep. The treehouse seemed to settle, creaking softly in the oak's embrace. Not an alarming creak, but the sound of wood relaxing the way a body relaxes when it finally lies down. Elowen's thoughts became softer, less shaped. The stars outside blinked slowly as if winking. The forest held the treehouse. The oak held the forest. The night held everything. And in that holding, nothing needed to be done. The hours passed gently, not measured by clocks, but by small changes. The fire sinking into glowing coals, the moon shifting its angle, the air cooling just a little more. Rowan slept deeply in the loft, their face smooth in the lantern's dim light. Every so often they exhaled a longer breath, the kind that releases something old. Bramble remained curled near their feet, an anchor of warmth. Aloan drifted in and out of light sleep in the chair, her head resting against the cushion. When she woke briefly, it was only to add another small log to the stove, or to close the window a little more when the breeze turned cooler. Each time she moved, she did it slowly, as if not to disturb the quiet spell of the treehouse. At one point she stood by the window and looked out again. The forest was a sea of dark shapes, but not empty. It was full of life resting. The canopy swayed slightly, a slow rocking motion. Fireflies still blinked here and there. Fewer now, like the last thoughts before sleep. Aloan placed her hand on the window frame and felt the oak's steadiness beneath the wood. She imagined the roots deep in the earth, drinking from hidden streams, holding the tree upright through storms and seasons. She liked to think the oak knew what it was doing, holding this little tree house, holding these small moments of comfort for whoever needed them. Aloan returned to her chair. She pulled the blanket up higher. Her breathing slowed again. The treehouse's warmth wrapped around her like a lullaby. Above, Rowan shifted slightly, then settled. Their hand found Bramble again, and the cat's purr deepened, as if responding to the touch. The night grew quieter still. Now the story begins to soften the way a voice softens when it knows you're almost asleep. The fire is low, the light is dim. The treehouse feels like a gentle pocket of warmth floating among leaves. Aloan rests in her chair, safe and still. Rowan sleeps in the loft, held by the quilt, by the wood, by the quiet. Outside, the forest breathes slowly, in and out, like it has always done. If any thoughts drift through your mind, they can be like those fireflies, blinking once, then fading. No need to follow them. Just breathe. In, slow and easy. Out, long and soft. The oak stands steady. The treehouse cradles its warmth. The night wraps everything in calm. Your body can feel heavier now, sinking down into comfort. Your face can soften, your shoulders can loosen, your breath can become even slower. The world is quiet, the story is quiet, and you are allowed to rest. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.